Right. Hamas is one of the most sophisticated terrorist organizations in the world when it comes to propaganda, using media, using online platforms, and psychological warfare. Now, it didn't start now. Hamas, from the very beginning, started to use, I would say, campaigns, mass mediated campaign, online campaigns against Israel. I think the most successful one and the most effective one was the Gilad Shalit case, when they already captured the Israeli soldier, kept him for 5 years. During those 5 years, they released several videos, like the ones we saw recently, with Gilad Shalit speaking and trying actually to convince the Israeli public to support the deal. And they were successful. It took time, but finally the pressure from the family, from the Israeli public on the leaders and the prime ministers changed. But finally, the one who signed the deal was Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi. So there was a campaign, a sophisticated campaign, using a hostage, sending the videotapes with him asking for release for the deal, and finally getting the deal. In the deal, for one soldier, Israel released over 1,000 Palestinian terrorists, including the one who actually designed the attack of the 7th October.
We can see how effective those tools are. Could you give specific examples of how Hamas used those tools during the war?
Well, you have to understand that there were several stages. In the psychological campaign, we studied it, we monitored it, and we even published our findings in several articles and conference presentation. It is clear that Hamas planned the psychological warfare campaign the way they planned the physical on-ground campaign long before it started, long before the 7th of October. So the first stage in the campaign was planning it. And it is very clear that they designed the psychological part of the campaign long before the actual attack on 7th of October. It means that they trained people, for example, how to use cameras. They equipped people, the fighters, the Nukhba, with telephones that had cameras on it. They taught the Nukhba fighters how to use the cameras, and even more importantly, how to send back to Gaza the videotapes. So, and finally came the night before the attack, if you remember the SIM card, when thousands of Nukhba fighters, Nukhba terrorists, replaced the SIM cards in the phones with Israeli SIM cards, which allowed them to connect to Israeli networks and to send the videotapes that they took more efficiently, quicker way to the operation center in Gaza. So the first stage was preparation, getting the cameras, training people, getting the SIM cards, teaching the fighters how to do that. That was the first stage. Then came the attack day, 7th of October. During the attack, many of them were instructed to videotape everything, including the killing, the burning. I won't go into all the details. We saw many of those videos. Now, all of these videos were sent during the attack, during the 7th of October, back to the Hamas in Gaza. So Hamas was not just sending people out to the fields, to the fighting in Israel and to the butchering of Israelis, but also was prepared to get those videos and upload them and stream them on social media. So from the first hours of the attack, we already saw on social media streaming live some of the videos of the attacks, of the taking over of Israeli camps, of taking over and killing Israeli citizens in kibbutzim, in moshavim. All of this was uploaded online. So the Israelis, in a way, were not just attacked physically in the battlefield of the 7th of October, but also on the, I would call it in cyberspace, with online psychological campaign. So that was the second stage. Now it didn't end up then. Then came the third stage. They had hostages taken, to some of them dead, some of them alive. They started videotaping the hostages from several days after the attack. and already released them. Now, the idea was to send those videos to break the Israeli public, to break the Israeli army's will to fight, to show that they are powerful, to show that they can do whatever they want in Israeli territory, conquer kibbutzim, moshavim, and Israeli camps. So the second stage, or the third stage actually, after the attack itself, was starting to release and feed social media with videos of hostages speaking about being captured and held and so on, including some old women, including a young female hostage and so on. All of them were given text. There was a text dictated to them in which they read in front of the camera. All of these videotapes were edited, adding some slogans, translation to Hebrew, and uploaded to social media. Then came the next stage. The next stage involved the first release of hostages. Again, even that event from the very beginning was used for psychological warfare. When Hamas, the soldiers dressed up, full uniform, weapons, and so on, were accompanying those poor old women, young children. That was the first exchange, first deal, to the Red Cross cars. It continued with additional videos, a new stage of Israeli hostages, males too, some of them dead by now, killed during the stay in Gaza, mostly killed by Hamas, executed by Hamas. And we had also, and it's happening even in these days, when some of the hostages were released, they staged, and I mean actually staged, an event with a stage, with media, with cameras, with slogans, with pictures, and so on, all of this, and Hebrew messages all over, again, a part of the psychological warfare to appeal to the Israeli public, to send messages of, we are here, we are not broken, we are still strong, and we will continue fighting.
What long-term psychological effects can you foresee on the Israeli population?
It's very hard to measure accurately the impact, the effect of psychological warfare. It's basically impossible to measure the net impact of the psychological campaign, because the audiences are exposed to various sources, and you can't really isolate empirically the contribution of the psychological warfare. Nevertheless, speaking about the Hamas campaign, first, there are some evidence, convincing evidence, of the exposure of the Israeli public to those messages, which is a clear measure of impact. From the first day, the 7th of October, many Israelis turned to social media. Many of them turned to social media which are not Israeli. Many of them watched Gaza Now, for example, which is an online account, Telegram account, used by Hamas. And there are three versions, in Arabic, in English, and in Hebrew. The one in Hebrew is targeting Israeli audiences. Now, why do the Israelis expose themselves to messages of Hamas? Because many Israelis wanted to know, especially during the first days of the war, when there was like a fog of war. Nobody knew what exactly is happening. Then came the issue of the hostages. Many Israelis wanted to gain as much information as they can from any source, even Hamas sources. So the families, relatives, and the Israeli public in general were looking for information, and they found it online. And most of those online sources were associated with Hamas. Even today, we see a lot of exposure to social media, and especially to Telegram posting, online social media posting by Hamas. And the Israelis are exposed either directly or through the social media and the diffusion of those videos and declarations and messages in social media that the Israelis are consuming. So the first indication that I have is the exposure. Second, despite the fact that I can't measure it accurately, it's quite clear that if you expose people to pictures of dying hostages, if you show them people that look, release hostages that look like those people coming out from the camps, like from Auschwitz during the Nazi time, it's hard to imagine that there is no impact. It certainly touches the Israelis' nerves, and I would say the most sensitive nerves. You can't be indifferent. You can't be apathetic to when you're exposed to messages like that. So, despite the fact that I can't really tell you how much was the emotional impact, it is very clear that they contributed to the Israeli feeling of, in some ways, despair, anger, and also some kind of sadness, which goes with us in the last year and a half.
Psychological warfare purpose is to break the opponent's will to fight. Wouldn't you think that recent events may have had an opposite effect on Israel?
Yeah, we call it the boomerang effect. When you get the opposite of what you actually intended to get. Um, Sometimes psychological warfare campaigns result in the other side so eager to take revenge, so eager to fight back, that it even makes them stronger. To some extent, I think this phenomena happened here too. I think the Israelis exposed to the atrocities of Hamas, and there were certainly atrocities during 7th of October and atrocities towards the hostages. Just think about the Bivas family losing a mother and two babies. One of them was 1 year old when he wasn't even walking when he was killed. Of course, that's not only sending messages of power and military power, but also messages of cruelty, inhumanity, and that may trigger and I would say stiffness, wish to take revenge, and anger. I think all of these are psychological impact. Nevertheless, if we measure the success of Hamas campaign, and believe me, Hamas was very eager to get the deal exchange in the exchanges of the hostages for hundreds and maybe thousands of the fighters from Israeli prisons, and the Israelis stopping the war, the Israelis leaving the presence, leaving Gaza Strip. All of these were successes that Hamas managed to get through pressuring the Israeli government to sign the deal. Some of this pressure came from the public, some of it came from the families, and some of it certainly was caused by the Hamas campaign.
Would it be reasonable to think that Hamas was trained by foreign entity to this psychological war?
I would differentiate between inspiration and training. I think Hamas was inspired by ISIS very clearly. And ISIS certainly knew how to use cruelty, atrocities, and media to create a global impact, which was unknown of before ISIS. Nevertheless, inspiration is one thing. I think Hamas was inspired by ISIS, but I don't think they were trained either, not by Russians, not by Persian, Iranians, and not by anyone, or not by ISIS. I'm saying it because I know Hamas from the media point of view, from the use of media. Hamas has been here for many years and knew very well how to use the media. They were experienced and I would say well experienced with using all types of radio, newspapers, print, if you want, online, all the online platforms. Even during the war, they used AI, artificial intelligence, to produce fake videos and fake items and fake pictures. So I don't think anyone, certainly not the Russians, could train Hamas and teach them. Hamas can teach others, but they certainly were inspired by ISIS, but they needed no training, no learning. They had their own school for many years.
We might have underestimated them.
I think we underestimated Hamas's power, not just military power, not just the vicious willingness to invade and kill and murder and butcher and rape and burn people, but we also underestimated the willingness to operate on the psychological way, which they did and did very efficiently and well prepared for.
If you feel talking about it, could you give us your opinion on the Bibas family release?
It was clear that Hamas continues its campaign. Every exchange of Israeli hostages, even giving back coffins of dead people, is used by Hamas for media purposes, for public relations, so psychological warfare. Not just targeting the Israelis, but also targeting Arab countries, targeting the population in Gaza, targeting world public opinion. I don't think they did very well when they brought out hostages that were almost skeletons. I don't think it was well accepted. I think it triggered a lot of anger, not just in Israel, but also in Arab countries and also in the world public opinion. Now, today, they released, while I'm speaking to you, they released the coffins of 4 dead Israelis. 3 of them, the Bivas family, the poor mother, and 2 young babies. One of them was 1 year old when he was kidnapped and killed. Now, they staged the event. They even used this cynical exchange for psychological warfare and propaganda campaign. Israel decided, all the Israeli channels decided not to broadcast the staging of the event as Hamas wanted it. Nevertheless, it was broadcast on Arab stations, satellite services in Arab countries, and which Hamas, of course, wanted it. I watched it, and I'm glad that most Israelis will not be exposed to it. I think it was a cynical abuse, showing no humanity, no mercy, no even a basic understanding of human values. Will it benefit them? I don't think so. I think they would be better off without these shows. But Hamas is Hamas, and Hamas is used to disregard human rights, disregard or no respect for humanity, and deep hatred of Israelis in any form, even if they are babies and even if they are dead babies, as in the case of the Bivas family. So I think the Israelis did well in not broadcasting it, but I'm not sure that even the broadcasting on Arab channels served the Hamas the way they wanted.
What do you think of Israel's answer to those tactics?
Well, one of the objectives of our studies were how do you deal with psychological warfare? What do you do to counter it or to defend yourself against it? Is there a way to fight back? And we suggested, based on the literature, based on other studies, including ours, and based on the current events in the war with Hamas, that there are several measures a country can take, a society, a government, and an army can take when fighting against a psychological campaign. Some of these were used in this war, and some of them even, to some extent, proved to be efficient. The first one is immune. Immune your population that you are going to be exposed to psychological campaign. The Israelis knew Hamas. We knew about their willingness and their capacities and their experience in the past of using psychological campaign. So it was quite clear that they are going to do it this time too, especially since they took over 250 Israeli hostages, dead and alive. It was clear that they are going to use it. So the Israelis were well prepared in a way to be exposed to psychological warfare campaign. And what they did by several means, and I'll outline them, was to prepare the population. Let the Israeli population know, and that there will be a psychological campaign, that there will be what Israel labeled as a psychological terrorism, and it was badly needed preparation because then the campaign came. So from the first day, from the 7th of October and after that, the Israeli spokespersons, especially the military spokesperson, Dover Tzahal, mentioned several times, even in the first days, several times in one day, that the Israelis should be warned. We are going to experience a horrible, shocking wave of psychological campaign. Be prepared for that. So that was the first defense. Immune the population, make them be aware that they are going to be victimized by this kind of campaign, that they should either not watch it or at least know that this is an attempt to influence them, to break them down, and so on. Then came the second measure. The second measure was trying to block some of those messages, like telling the Israeli channels, not asking, not telling them, there was no directions, to avoid some of the videos. And I know of the censorship, and it was not an enforced censorship, it was the channels themselves deciding not to show some of the videos from the 7th of October, some of the videos of the hostages, some of the, like today, the release of the coffins and so on. I think it was a decision made by the channels themselves, not enforced by any kind of formal censorship, but it was some kind of enforcement, self-enforcement of red lines. We are not going to broadcast everything. Then came the third attempt, and that was a counter-attack. The Israelis not just sat down and waited for the campaign to be launched, but the Israelis also attacked. We had also attempts to bring down channels. The online channel, the website of Hamas, or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, are down. From 7th of October, you can't access them. I know because I'm monitoring all those channels, all those websites. They are down. The Israelis brought them down. Some of the social media were down. There were attempts to limit the ability of Hamas to use all other social media, all other broadcasting measures and media and so on. So that was an attack. The attack involved not just shutting down stations or blocking access or removing from online, but also a psychological campaign launched by Israel. It's not only Hamas used psychological measures against the Israelis, but the Israeli used a psychological campaign against the Gazan. We don't know most of it, we are not exposed to it, but there are certainly people in the Israeli army whose profession and I would say preparation and job is to deal with psychological campaign. So we are not just defensive, we are also offensive in this kind of arena.
Looking forward, what can be done against those tactics?
There are many lessons to be learned, and I think the Gaza war should teach us first how to deal and defend against psychological warfare. We can look at the measures taken. You can see what worked and what didn't work. We can improve our own defense mechanism. As for the future, it's quite hard, I would say, because some of the measures that may be applicable today will either not be applicable in the future or will be less useful. If we speak about my area of research, about online propaganda and online psychological warfare, well, we know the social media today, but what about the future? How will AI be used in the future by those terrorists or criminals who want to, I would say, abuse and use the potential of AI? How about metaverse, another emerging platform? We know that there are now new social media that are not controlled at all. I can mention the 8chan, 4chan, Gab, Telegram, TamTam. We studied them all. All of these are not regulated by anyone. So the future of online campaigns is unpredictable. We certainly don't know how the cyberspace will look 2 years from now, 3 years from now. So it's quite hard to predict what will work and what will not. But at least for the short term, there are many lessons to be learned from the Gaza war in terms of launching and defending against psychological warfare.
Could you explain the difference between disinformation and misinformation and how they impact the conflict locally and globally?
Yeah. Well, Hamas during this war used both misinformation and disinformation, and quite efficiently. I'm not sure that it worked for the Israelis, but it certainly worked for the global media and for the global public opinion. Disinformation, you simply provide lies. You give wrong numbers about the number of victims, about the number of casualties among the Israeli armies. You just invent fake news. And this is totally disinformation, nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with actual facts. However, you can, in a way, distort existing event and create misinformation. For example, a rocket lands in a Gaza hospital. It happened. It was launched by Palestinians. It went bad. It didn't reach the Israeli territory. It killed some people. So you take this event and distort it to become, first, a rocket launched by the Israelis, hundreds, if not thousands, of victims. Wrong. So what the distinction is either full lies or taking some kind of events and distorting them, and I would say changing them into misinformation. Now Hamas used them both and used very efficiently tools like AI to produce either disinformation, total lies, like taking pictures and videos from other places, wars in Syria, victims in Kosovo, and pretending that these are all happening in Gaza, which is total disinformation, or taking events that actually happen, but distorting them and changing them into lies.
And the impact is considerable when you look at global coverage or diplomatic ties.
Yeah, at least in the short run, Hamas was quite effective, convincing the world that Israel attacked the hospital, killing hundreds of innocent victims. It took hours until the Israelis could release formal, and we were lucky to have them, formal video clips showing that the rocket was launched from Gaza and not by Israelis. So they did score some points in several of the videos, in several of the disinformation messages. I don't think they were very successful in most of them because, again, the Israelis were quick to react. We know Hamas, we know that Hamas will be occupied in releasing misinformation and disinformation, and we knew that we have to react very fast because if we leave the stage for the lies, they will be successful. So the Israelis attempted at least to reply and provide accurate information within hours.
As an expert on the topic, are you optimistic on how things are going in Israel and globally around the world?
We started monitoring terrorist use of the media in the 90s when I was a very young young scholar. So I've been there, I would say, almost 50 years studying terrorist use of media. Then in the 90s, 1990s, like 30 years ago, we started monitoring online presence of terrorism. And then we started with websites, then came social media, then came the dark web, then came AI, metaverse, and others. Yeah, I've been there for many years. And if I can summarize, like for 50 years of studying online terrorism, no, I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic because terrorism is not going away. And it's not just the Israeli problem or Jewish problem, it's a global war. And ISIS is still there, and Al Qaeda is still there in different shapes and new formats in Africa, in Yemen, in other forms. We have also the extreme left movements, extreme right movements that turn to use terrorism. So terrorism is going to be here in the future. It's not going to disappear. It was here for thousands of years, and it will stay here. So that's one assumption. The second assumption is the more sophisticated media we have and the more open and liberal media we have, the more terrorists are going to use it. So if we invent new platforms online, new social media, new tools like AI, like metaverse, like the darknet. The more platforms we have, the more options we give terrorists to use them. So in some ways, I'm not very optimistic. I think that in the future, we will see a lot more ways that terrorists and extremists, violent extremists, are going to use media and especially online media. And the only way I can think of that will reduce some of the pessimism is that if I see some signs that Western societies are considering tools and measures, countermeasures to immune societies against the abuse of social media and other platforms by terrorism. It won't, we won't be able to destroy terrorism entirely. We won't be able to close down our media and especially our new online media from terrorists, but we certainly can do some attempts to minimize the way they are abusing it and manipulating it. Because when Zuckerberg invented Facebook, he didn't think about terrorism. We should think now that in the
Right.
future, whatever new platforms we design and apply should be immune, at least more immune, against terrorist and extremist use.
Well, thank you for your time and your answers, Professor. It
Okay.
was very interesting. Thank you.